My husband and his 24-year-old mistress stood in the warmth of my $3 million living room, clinking their crystal glasses together as they locked me outside in the freezing November rain. Sienna was wearing my custom silk robe, leaning against Julian's shoulder, pointing at me through the massive bay window and laughing. They thought they had just defeated a naive, helpless housewife. They did not know I was holding a heavily encrypted satellite phone, and the single 12-digit passcode I was about to enter would systematically erase their entire existence from the face of the earth in less than 3 hours. Chapter 1: The glass wall. The sound of a deadbolt sliding into place is a sound you never forget. For Julian Mercer, it was the sound of ultimate control. A final, triumphant click echoing through the sprawling suburban foyer. Outside, the rain was coming down in sheets. It was an icy, punishing deluge typical of late autumn in Chicago. The temperature was hovering just above freezing, and the wind carried a serrated edge that cut straight through the thin cotton of my pajama pants and a lightweight cashmere cardigan I had instinctively grabbed. I stood barefoot on the imported slate tiles of the front porch. My damp hair was already plastered to my cheeks. I stared at the heavy mahogany front door, my mind processing the sheer, breathtaking audacity of what had just happened. Less than 5 minutes ago, the three of us had been standing in the kitchen. It had not started as a screaming match. It had started with me asking a simple, terrifyingly calm question. I had been balancing the books for our joint checking account, a chore Julian usually insisted on handling himself, but he had carelessly left his laptop open on the marble kitchen island. I had seen a wire transfer, $250,000 moved from our primary savings into an offshore holding company registered in Delaware. When I asked him about it, Julian did not apologize. He did not even attempt to invent a plausible excuse. He had been drinking his favorite 18-year-old single malt scotch, just enough to strip away the veneer of the polished corporate executive he presented to the world. He had slammed the laptop shut. "You contribute absolutely nothing to this household financially, Charlotte," he had spat, his handsome face twisting into a sneer of absolute contempt. "You have the nerve to interrogate me about how I manage my money?" "It is our money, Julian," I had replied, my voice steady despite the adrenaline spiking in my veins. "That savings account was for the house renovations." "Where'd it go?" Before Julian could answer, footsteps echoed on the grand staircase. Sienna Thorne walked into the kitchen. She was a junior acquisitions manager at Julian's logistics firm. She was also the woman he had been sleeping with for the past 7 months. She was wearing my ivory silk robe, the one Julian had bought for my birthday. She walked over to him, wrapping her arms around his waist from behind, resting her chin on his shoulder. "Tell her, Julian," Sienna had purred, looking at me with eyes full of malicious delight. "Tell her about the penthouse." Julian had smirked, wrapping his hand over Sienna's. "I transferred the funds to secure a down payment on a luxury condo downtown, Charlotte. I am filing for divorce on Monday. Sienna and I are moving on. You can pack your bags and go back to that pathetic little art gallery you work at." I had pulled out a printed screenshot of the wire transfer. "I'm not leaving," I said. "And you are not taking our life savings to fund a penthouse for your mistress." That was when the physical intimidation started. Julian was a large man, a former collegiate athlete who carried himself with the heavy entitlement of a man who believed the world existed solely to serve him. He stepped forward, grabbing the lapels of my cashmere cardigan. He did not hit me. Julian was too smart for that, too aware of the legal implications of a bruise. But he shoved me backward. My bare feet slipped on the polished hardwood. He backed me out of the kitchen, his voice rising to a deafening roar, forcing me down the hallway and into the entryway. "You want to act like a crazy, ungrateful parasite?" he snarled, pulling the front door open. "You can go outside and cool off until you remember who pays for the roof over your head." He shoved me violently onto the porch. Before I could regain my balance, the heavy mahogany door slammed shut in my face. Then came the click of the deadbolt. Now, I stood in the freezing rain. Through the narrow sidelight window next to the door, I could see directly into the foyer and the living room beyond. Julian was not standing by the door, filled with regret. He was walking away, his gait relaxed and swaggering. Sienna met him in the living room. She handed him his crystal tumbler of scotch. He wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her close. They stood in front of the roaring gas fireplace, bathed in warm, golden light. Sienna turned her head and looked straight at the window. She pointed at me, standing in the dark, shivering in the rain. She threw her head back and laughed. Julian kissed her neck, raising his glass in a mock toast toward the window. They thought I was going to panic. They expected me to start banging on the heavy wood, weeping, begging to be let back in so I would not freeze to death. They expected me to run across the sprawling manicured lawn to the neighbors, sobbing and asking to use their phone to call the police. But I did not cry. The initial shock was rapidly dissolving, replaced by an emotion I had not allowed myself to feel in the 5 years I'd been married to Julian Mercer. It was a cold, crystalline, absolute rage. I reached into the pocket of my damp cardigan. My fingers, stiff and pale from the cold, brushed against the cold metal of my smartphone. I had instinctively grabbed it off the kitchen counter when Julian started backing me toward the door. I pulled it out. The screen illuminated my wet face in the darkness of the porch. I looked through the glass one last time. Julian and Sienna were sitting on the expensive leather sofa, drinking my liquor, in my house, entirely convinced they were the undisputed masters of the universe. You have absolutely no idea, I whispered to the rain, a single tear of pure, liberated adrenaline running down my cheek. You have no idea whose house you are sitting in. I turned my back on the mahogany door and stepped off the porch into the freezing storm. Chapter 2, The Architecture of an Illusion. To understand the sheer magnitude of the mistake Julian Mercer had just made, one had to understand the intricate web of lies that formed the foundation of our marriage. Julian was the senior vice president of acquisitions at a formidable Chicago financial logistics firm named Apex Capital. He was a man who worshipped at the altar of his own ambition. He drove a slate gray imported sports car, wore bespoke suits, and spent his weekends networking with minor politicians. He was entirely self-made, or so he loved to remind everyone. He viewed wealth not just as currency, but as a weapon. It was a tool to dominate, to control, and to demand submission from those around him. When he met me 5 years ago at a charity gala, he saw the perfect accessory. I was dressed in understated clothes, wore minimal makeup, and spoke with a quiet cadence. I told him I worked at a small, independent art gallery downtown. I lived in a modest apartment. I seemed entirely unimpressed by his flashy car and his bragging, which only made him want to conquer me more. Throughout our marriage, Julian cultivated a dynamic of total financial control. He insisted I quit my job at the gallery. He took over all our accounts. He gave me a generous allowance, but he monitored every penny I spent. He needed me dependent. He needed to know that the food on my plate and the clothes on my back existed solely because of his brilliance. But Julian's arrogance had blinded him to the most basic rule of predators. Never assume you're the most dangerous creature in the room. I was not a middle-class art history major. My maiden name was not Charlotte Evans, as it appeared on the forged background documents I had meticulously created in my early 20s. My real name was Charlotte Kensington. I was the youngest daughter of Richard Kensington, the notoriously reclusive billionaire founder of Kensington Global, a massive international conglomerate that owned everything from commercial real estate portfolios in Europe to shipping fleets in the Pacific. The Kensington family wealth was old, vast, and completely off the grid of public billionaire lists. I had grown up suffocated by that wealth. I had watched money tear my extended family apart, turning relatives into paranoid sociopaths and attracting a never-ending swarm of sycophants. Desperate for a normal life, I had struck a deal with my father. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to live as an ordinary person, to find a man who loved me for my mind and my heart, not my trust fund. My father had agreed, but on one condition. I would remain under the quiet, invisible protection of the family's infrastructure. The apartment Julian thought I rented when we met actually belonged to a Kensington shell corporation. The art gallery I worked at was a tax write-off fully funded by my family. And the $3 million modern Tudor home on Oakwood Drive, the home where Julian had just locked me out so he could entertain his mistress, Julian had not bought it. 3 years ago, when Julian was desperate to move into the prestigious neighborhood to impress his corporate bosses, his mortgage application had been secretly rejected. He was massively over-leveraged, swimming in hidden debt from bad investments he had hidden from me. I had quietly intervened to protect his fragile ego. I had a Kensington proxy firm purchase the massive house in cash. They then created a fake leasing agreement disguised as a rent-to-own mortgage through a fictitious bank. Julia Mercer had been writing a monthly mortgage check for 3 years to a bank that did not exist. Every cent of his mortgage went directly into a charitable trust fund for environmental conservation set up in my name. He did not own a single brick of the house he was currently sitting in. He was, legally speaking, a temporary squatter. I walked across the wet grass, the freezing mud seeping between my bare toes. I bypassed the sprawling heated garage where Julian's beloved sports car was parked and headed for the side driveway. Parked there, exposed to the elements, was my car. A 5-year-old, unremarkable beige station wagon. Julian hated the car. He said it embarrassed him when the neighbors saw it. But he did not know that the vehicle had reinforced bullet-resistant glass, run-flat tires, and a military-grade satellite communication system hidden beneath the dashboard. It was a non-negotiable safety requirement for my father's security team. I opened the heavy door and slid into the driver's seat. I slammed the door shut, instantly cutting off the roar of the wind and rain. The interior of the car was freezing, the leather seats biting into my damp pajamas. My fingers were shaking so violently I could barely operate the ignition. I pushed the start button, and the engine purred to life with a quiet, powerful hum. I cranked the heat to maximum, holding my numb blue hands over the vents, waiting for the warm air to start flowing. I sat there in the dark for a long time. The street lights illuminated the heavy rain pounding against the windshield. 5 years. I had given Julia Mercer 5 years of my life. I had played the part of the devoted, supportive wife flawlessly. I had cooked his meals, organized his social calendar, ironed his shirts, and swallowed his daily condescending remarks. I had truly tried to make it work, holding on to the delusion that beneath his arrogance was the charming man I had met at the gala. But tonight, the illusion shattered completely. The physical shove, the lockout, bringing his mistress into my home, the theft of our joint money. Julian was not a flawed man trying his best. He was a parasite, and Kensingtons do not tolerate parasites. Chapter 3 Protocol Omega. I picked up my phone. I unlocked it and swiped past my usual contacts. The local PDA moms, the florist, the dry cleaner. I opened a hidden encrypted application buried deep in the phone's operating system. It required a 12-digit passcode followed by a biometric retina scan. The screen turned a stark, glowing crimson. A single contact name appeared on the screen. Victor Sterling. Victor Sterling was not a hitman. He was something much more terrifying. He was the Kensington family's principal fixer, a brilliant, ruthless attorney and former intelligence operative who managed the family's most delicate and high-stakes crises. He commanded an army of forensic accountants, cybersecurity experts, and private investigators. His job was to protect the Kensington Empire and destroy anyone who threatened it. I had not spoken to Victor in 3 years. The last time we spoke was when he had secured the fake mortgage for the Oakwood Drive house. He had warned me then that Julian was a grifter. I had refused to listen. I pressed the call button. It rang exactly once. Charlotte, a deep, impossibly calm voice answered. No pleasantries. No surprise. Just immediate, lethal attention. Victor, I said. My voice dropped its usual soft, melodic tone. The tremor of the cold vanished, replaced by a cold, hardened steel that sounded terrifyingly like my billionaire father. I am sorry to wake you. I am never asleep when Kensington calls, Victor replied smoothly. Where are you? Your GPS beacon shows you are outside the primary residence. Are you in danger? I am in the station wagon, I said, staring through the rain-streaked windshield at the glowing windows of the house. Julian locked me out. It is freezing rain. I am in my pajamas. There was a profound silence on the other end of the line. When Victor spoke again, the calm veneer remained, but the underlying tone was absolute murder. Understood. I am dispatching a private tactical extraction team to your location now. They will breach the residence and secure him. A medical unit will follow. No, I interrupted sharply. Call them off, Victor. I do not want him physically harmed. Charlotte, the man put hands on you and locked you in a freezing storm, Victor stated, the sound of rapid typing echoing in the background. He has crossed the red line. Your father gave me explicit instructions regarding your physical safety. My father is not managing this. I am, I said. I took a deep breath of the warming air from the car's vents. Physical violence is too good for him, Victor. Julian thinks he is a master of the universe. He thinks he holds all the cards. I want his universe dismantled brick by brick. I want him to wake up tomorrow morning and realize he does not exist anymore. I see, Victor said softly. We are moving from containment to scorched earth. What are your parameters? I want Protocol Omega initiated, I said. The words tasted like ash and iron in my mouth. Protocol Omega, Victor repeated. Full financial, professional, and social liquidation. Once I press this button, Charlotte, there is no undoing it. His life as he knows it will be erased. Do it, I commanded. Start with his job. He works for Apex Capital. Apex Capital, Victor mused, the typing accelerating. Yes, I know them. Interestingly enough, Kensington Global acquired a 60% controlling stake in Apex's parent company 3 weeks ago through a proxy hedge fund in London. Technically, Julian Mercer works for you. A dark, humorless smile touched my lips. Fire him. Effective immediately, for cause. Dig into his accounts. He wired $250,000 today to a shell company called Blue Horizon Holdings. I suspect he has been embezzling from his corporate clients to fund his lifestyle and his mistress. Sienna Thorne, Victor provided instantly. Yes, we have been monitoring his communications with her for 7 months per my standard security protocols regarding your inner circle. I have the wire transfer details on my screen right now. It was incredibly sloppy. He routed it through a server in the Cayman Islands, but the IP address traces back to his home network. That is federal wire fraud. Freeze his accounts, I ordered. All of them. His checking, his savings, his retirement funds, his secret crypto wallets. Drain the Blue Horizon account and flag it to the IRS and the FBI for money laundering. Done, Victor said. The keystrokes sounded like gunshots over the line. What about the mistress? She is currently in the house with him, correct? Yes, I said, my eyes narrowing as I looked at the window of the living room. Sienna is an employee at Apex Capital as well. Since she is the intended beneficiary of the stolen corporate funds, list her as a co-conspirator in the embezzlement scheme. Terminate her employment immediately. Freeze her personal bank accounts, pending the federal investigation. Consider it done, Victor said. And the residence? The house is owned by Kensington Property Trust. Evict him tonight, I said. I will have the local authorities execute an emergency eviction order. He is technically a squatter with a fraudulent lease, and she is an illegal trespasser. No police yet. I corrected him. I want to watch the house fall down around them first. Just cut the utilities. Power, water, gas, internet. Everything. Shut it down. The regional grid operator is a subsidiary of ours, Victor noted. I am accessing their mainframe now. Charlotte, a security detail is still en route to extract you. You cannot stay in the car. Tell them to park at the end of the block and wait. I'm not leaving, I said, leaning back against the leather headrest. I want a front row seat. Very well, Victor said, commencing Protocol Omega. Good hunting, Charlotte. The line clicked dead. I placed the phone on the passenger seat. The car's heater was finally blowing hot air, thawing my frozen limbs. I folded my arms and fixed my gaze on the glowing windows of the $3 million house. Inside, Julian and Sienna were still drinking my scotch. I counted down in my head. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Inside the house, the grand chandelier in the foyer suddenly flickered. And then, with a heavy, groaning sound, every single light in the massive house blinked out, plunging the property into absolute, pitch-black darkness. Chapter 4. The darkness and the sudden silence of the night, barely audible over the sound of the driving rain. I heard the faint, muffled sound of Julian dropping his crystal tumbler on the hardwood floor. It was just the beginning. Inside the sprawling Tudor on Oakwood Drive, the sudden absence of light was physically jarring. One moment, Julian Mercer was standing in a pool of warm, expensive illumination, his arm wrapped tightly around his young mistress. The next, they were swallowed by an ink-black void. The heavy crystal tumbler slipped from his relaxed grip, hitting the imported Brazilian hardwood floor with a sharp crack. Amber liquid splashed across his bare ankles and the hem of his tailored trousers. Damn it, Julian cursed, his voice echoing strangely in the sudden, dead silence of the house. He did not panic. Men like Julian did not panic over a blown fuse. He assumed the violent storm battering the windows had simply knocked a tree into a transformer down the street. It was an inconvenience, nothing more. What happened? Sienna shrieked, clutching his arm in the dark. It is just the storm, Sienna, Julian said dismissively, pulling his iPhone from his pocket and activating the flashlight feature. Relax. The harsh white beam cut through the gloom, illuminating the shattered glass at his feet. He stepped over the mess and navigated out of the living room, the beam of his phone sweeping across the high ceilings and expensive artwork he had meticulously curated to project an image of generational wealth. He walked down the main hallway, toward the mudroom, where the primary electrical panel was located. He opened the gray metal door of the breaker box. Not a single switch was tripped. They were all uniformly aligned and on position. Frowning, Julian tapped his phone screen to check the time. It was 11:14 p.m. He navigated to his utility app, fully expecting to see a widespread outage map covering the entire North Shore area. But as the app tried to load, the little loading circle spun endlessly. He glanced at the top right corner of his screen. His cell service, which usually boasted a flawless 5G connection, now displayed a blinking SOS symbol. No service. Cheap garbage, he muttered, assuming the storm was interfering with the cell towers. He walked back into the kitchen, his irritation mounting. It was fine. He had planned for this. When he had purchased the house, he had insisted on installing a top-of-the-line whole home standby generator. It was supposed to detect a power loss and kick on automatically within 10 seconds. It had been nearly 3 minutes, and the house remained dead. Julian marched to the back door, unlocked it, and stepped out onto the covered patio. The wind whipped rain into his face, instantly soaking his expensive shirt. He shined his flashlight toward the side of the house where the massive commercial-grade generator sat. He marched over to it, shielding his phone from the rain, and flipped open the control panel. The digital display was completely dark. He pressed the manual override switch. Nothing. He tried to prime the engine. Silence. It was as if the machine had been totally disconnected from its fuel source, which, technically, it had. Miles away in a secure server room, Victor Sterling's cyber team had breached the smart home network Julian was so proud of, manually overriding the digital gas valves and shutting off the fuel supply to the property. Shivering, Julian retreated back inside, locking the door behind him. The temperature in the house was already dropping. The radiant floor heating, which usually kept the hardwood pleasantly warm against his feet, was rapidly cooling into slabs of ice. Julian, Sienna called out from the living room, her voice laced with an annoying whine. It is freezing in here, and my phone does not have any signal. Just put a sweater on. Julian yelled back, his patience thinning. He went to the kitchen sink, intending to grab a paper towel, wet it, and wipe the spilled scotch off his leg. He turned the polished chrome faucet. A brief, pathetic hiss of air sputtered from the aerator, followed by a few muddy drops of water. Then nothing. Julian aggressively cranked the handle back and forth. No water. He tried the filtered water dispenser on the refrigerator. Dead. The annoyance finally curdled into a genuine sense of unease. A power outage was one thing. A simultaneous failure of the water main, the backup generator, and the cellular network was something else entirely. It felt profoundly unnatural. He walked to the front living room and peered through the bay window. He expected to see the entire street plunged into darkness. Instead, he saw the neighbor's massive colonial house directly across the street glowing brightly. Their porch lights were on, and he could see the flicker of a television through their upstairs window. The street lights were operating perfectly. Only his house was dark. Only his house was dead. Suddenly, he remembered his wife. A cruel, sudden smirk cut through his unease. Charlotte. She must be freezing to death out there, he thought. He assumed I was huddled on the porch, weeping, learning exactly what happened when you question the man who provided everything. He decided he would let me in. He would open the door, demand a groveling apology, and then make me clean up the broken glass while Sienna watched. He walked to the foyer, the beam of his phone bouncing off the walls. He unlocked the deadbolt, the mechanical click loud in the silent house, and pulled the heavy mahogany door open. All right, Charlotte, you have made your point, he started, his voice dripping with condescension. You can come inside now, but you are sleeping in the guest room. He stopped. The porch was empty. He swept his flashlight across the slate tiles. Nothing but pooling rain. He stepped out, the wind biting through his damp clothes, and looked around the yard. That was when he saw it. Parked at the edge of the driveway, half obscured by the driving rain, was my beige station wagon. The engine was running, the headlights were off, but he could see the faint red glow of the tail lights and the steady exhaust pluming in the cold air. Stubborn child, Julian sneered under his breath. She retreated to her pathetic car to stay warm. Let her sleep in the driveway, he decided. Let her wake up with a stiff neck and a newfound respect for his authority. He slammed the front door shut, throwing the deadbolt once more. He didn't realize that from the warmth of the car, I was watching him. I had seen the beam of his flashlight sweep the porch. I had seen his silhouette in the doorway. I watched him retreat back into his freezing, lightless tomb, completely unaware that the invisible noose Victor Sterling had constructed was already pulling tight around his neck. Chapter 5: The Liquidation. By 2 a.m., the temperature inside the Oakwood Drive house had plummeted to 45 degrees. Julian and Sienna were curled on the leather sofa in his study, wrapped in 2 heavy down comforters they had dragged down from the master bedroom. Sienna was crying softly, complaining about the cold and the fact that she could not check her social media. Julian ignored her. He could not sleep. The silence of the house was oppressive, broken only by the relentless drumming of the rain against the glass. His personal iPhone had died an hour ago, drained by his constant, frantic attempts to find a cellular signal. He was staring at the ceiling, trying to convince himself that he would simply call a contractor in the morning and bill the emergency repairs to his corporate expense account. Suddenly, the room was bathed in a harsh blue light. Julian bolted upright, throwing off the comforters. On his mahogany desk, his secondary device, a heavily encrypted corporate-issued smartphone that ran on a dedicated satellite network for international business, had suddenly illuminated. He scrambled off the sofa, his bare feet stinging against the freezing floor, and snatched the phone. It had a signal, a perfect, full-bar connection. The screen displayed a single urgent notification, an email from the Apex Capital Executive Human Resources Department. Julian unlocked the phone, his thumbs slightly numb from the cold. He opened the email. The subject line was in all caps, a glaring red flag in corporate communication. Subject: immediate termination of employment and revocation of access. Julian's breath caught in his throat. He read the first paragraph, his eyes darting frantically across the small screen. Dear Mr. Mercer, effective immediately, your employment as Senior Vice President of Acquisitions at Apex Capital is terminated for cause. Following an internal audit initiated by our parent holding company, we have uncovered irrefutable evidence of gross financial misconduct, breach of fiduciary duty, and the unauthorized diversion of client funds into offshore entities. Please be advised that all corporate access, including email, internet, and physical building access, has been permanently revoked. Furthermore, Apex Capital's legal counsel has formally notified the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Internal Revenue Service regarding the wire transfer of $250,000 to the entity known as Blue Horizon Holdings. Julian stopped breathing. The blood drained from his face, leaving him pale and clammy in the blue light of the phone. How? How had they executed an audit mere hours after he made the transfer? He had used a secure VPN. He had routed it through the Caymans. It was supposed to be untraceable, a clean extraction of funds before he served me with divorce papers. Apex Capital was a massive, slow-moving bureaucracy. An audit like that should have taken months, not hours. What is it? Sienna asked, her teeth chattering as she peeked out from under the comforter. What is wrong? Julian ignored her. His hands began to shake violently. He dropped to his knees in front of the coffee table, desperately opening the mobile hotspot feature on the corporate phone. He booted up his personal MacBook, praying the battery had enough juice left. It flickered to life. He connected to the hotspot, his fingers flying across the keyboard with panicked, sloppy keystrokes. He opened his web browser and immediately navigated to his primary bank. He typed in his login credentials. The screen loaded, but instead of his dashboard showing his comfortable 6-figure checking balance, a stark white page appeared with a padlock icon. Account locked. Fraud suspected. Please visit your local branch with 2 forms of government issued identification. Error code 809 IRS hold. No, Julian whispered, the sound ragged and desperate. He opened a new tab. He went to his investment portfolio. He had nearly $1 million tied up in index funds and tech stocks. It was his safety net. He logged in. The page loaded. Total account value, $0 status, Assets frozen pending federal investigation. A cold sweat broke out across his forehead, chilling him faster than the freezing air of the study. He was entirely locked out of the financial system. His corporate career was annihilated. He was a millionaire on paper, but in reality, he did not have a single cent to his name. Panic, raw and animalistic, finally set in. He needed to get out. He needed to access the $250,000 he had hidden in the Blue Horizon account. He could use that to hire a defense attorney. He could flee. He navigated to the dark web portal he used to access the Cayman account. It required 3 layers of authentication. He input them all perfectly, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The offshore dashboard appeared. Julian stared at the screen, his mind completely breaking. The balance was 0. But beneath the 0 was a message typed in plain English, bypassing all the bank's automated systems. It was not an official bank notification. It was a direct personal message injected straight into the portal's code. Did you really think I wouldn't check the ledger, Julian? V. Sterling. Julian did not know who V. Sterling was. But looking at that name, an icy terror gripped him. This was not bad luck. This was not an automated corporate audit. He was being hunted. Someone with godlike access to the global financial system was systematically erasing his life. Suddenly, the satellite phone buzzed again. It was an incoming text message. But it was not for Julian. Sienna's personal phone, which had been dead for hours due to the lack of cellular service, suddenly chimed loudly from the sofa. The satellite network had somehow forcefully pushed a connection to her device. Sienna grabbed her phone, her eyes widening in the darkness. What the hell? I have a signal for a second. Oh my God. What is it? Julian snapped, turning toward her. Sienna's face contorted in pure horror as she read the glowing screen. It is an email from Apex HR. I have been fired. Julian's heart plummeted. They are saying, I am an accessory to embezzlement. Sienna stammered, tears streaming down her face as panic overtook her. They say I received stolen corporate funds. Julian, what did you do? My bank app just sent an alert. All my accounts are frozen. I cannot even access my credit cards. It is a mistake. Julian lied frantically, standing up. It is an automated system error. I will fix it. Fix it. Sienna screamed, throwing the heavy comforter off her. She stood up, wearing my silk robe, her face twisted in rage. You told me the money for the penthouse was a bonus. You stole from the company. You dragged me into federal wire fraud. Shut up and let me think. Julian roared back. You ruined my life. Sienna shrieked, lunging at him and shoving his chest hard. I am 24. I'm but a federal prison because of you. You broke, pathetic loser. Julian shoved her back. Ha! She stumbled against the coffee table. Shut your mouth, Sienna. You were perfectly happy to spend the money yesterday. The sheer velocity of their destruction was incomprehensible. It had been less than 4 hours since he locked me out. 4 hours to dismantle 40 years of ruthless ambition and carefully constructed lies. For the first time all night, Julian thought about the woman in the driveway. The quiet, unassuming woman he had shoved out the door. The woman who never asked questions about his business. Who drove a 5-year-old station wagon. Who he thought was a helpless dependent. No, he thought, his mind rejecting the impossible. It cannot be Charlotte. She works in an art gallery. She is a nobody. But the timing was undeniable. Before he could process the thought any further, a new sound pierced the silence of the storm. It was the heavy, rhythmic crunch of tires on gravel. Julian crawled toward the bay window, pulling himself up to peer over the sill. Through the driving rain, he saw headlights sweeping across his front lawn. But it was not my station wagon moving. 2 massive, black, heavily armored SUVs had just pulled to a stop at the curb, boxing in the driveway. The engines rumbled with a deep, menacing hum. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the doors of the lead vehicle opened simultaneously. 4 men stepped out into the rain. They were dressed in dark tactical clothing, completely ignoring the freezing downpour. They moved with terrifying, coordinated precision, fanning out across the manicured lawn, heading straight for the front porch. Julian's heart stopped. These were not police officers. There were no flashing red and blue lights. There were no badges. This was a private extraction team. He backed away from the window, stumbling over the coffee table in the dark. He needed a weapon. He needed to hide. He turned toward the kitchen, toward the heavy butcher block where he kept the chef's knives. But before he could take 3 steps, a sound echoed through the massive house, freezing the blood in his veins. Thud, thud, thud. A massive, heavy fist pounding against the mahogany front door. Then, a voice amplified by a megaphone cut through the storm outside with absolute, uncompromising authority. Julian Mercer, this property is now under the legal control of Kensington Property Trust. You are currently trespassing. Open the door immediately, or we will breach it. Chapter 6. The breach. Julian Mercer backed away from the kitchen entrance, his bare feet slipping slightly on the freezing hardwood. The voice booming from the megaphone outside did not belong to a police officer. It possessed a chilling, corporate sterility that terrified him far more than the threat of a standard arrest. Julian Mercer, you have 30 seconds to comply before we initiate a forced entry protocol. You cannot do this. Julian screamed into the empty, pitch-black foyer, his voice cracking with a mixture of rage and terror. I own this house. I have rights. I'm calling the police. He frantically tapped the screen of his corporate satellite phone, dialing 911. The call connected instantly, bypassing the dead local towers via orbit. Emergency dispatcher, what is your location? A calm voice answered. My house is being invaded. 4217, Oakwood Drive. Send units now. They have armored vehicles. Julian yelled, pacing like a caged animal behind the sweeping grand staircase. There was a brief pause on the line. The sound of rapid typing echoed in Julian's ear. Mr. Mercer, the dispatcher asked, her tone shifting from helpful to distinctly bureaucratic. We have a log from the Kensington Property Trust regarding that address. An emergency court-ordered eviction is currently underway, executed by a licensed private security firm due to fraudulent tenancy. What? Julian sputtered. Local law enforcement has been instructed to stand down and observe only. Sir, for your own safety, I advise you to open the door and comply with the property owners. The line clicked dead. Julian stared at the phone. Property owners. The words swirled in his mind, nonsensical and completely devastating. Before his brain could process the fact that the local police had just officially abandoned him to a private army, a deafening mechanical whine erupted from the front porch. They were not using a battering ram. They were using a hydraulic spreader, the kind firefighters use to pry open crushed vehicles. Crack! The sound of the reinforced door frame, splintering, echoed like a gunshot. The heavy deadbolt Julian had so triumphantly slid into place hours ago tore through the imported mahogany like a hot knife through butter. With a final, agonizing groan of tearing wood, the massive front door swung violently open, slamming against the foyer wall. For blinding, 1,000-lumen tactical flashlights pierced the darkness, crisscrossing the foyer and pinning Julian against the wall beneath the staircase. Sienna screamed, dropping to the floor and covering her head as the beams of light swept over her. Hand where we can see them, Mr. Mercer, a voice commanded. A tall man stepped into the light, lowering his flashlight slightly so it didn't completely blind Julian, though the glare remained oppressive. He wasn't wearing a ski mask or SWAT gear. He wore a high-end waterproof tactical jacket with an earpiece discreetly coiled around his ear. His name tag simply read, Harrison. What is the meaning of this? Julian demanded, trying desperately to inject some of his usual corporate authority into his voice. It failed miserably. He was standing in wet pajama pants, shivering violently, backed into a corner. Harrison ignored the question. He reached inside his jacket and pulled out a thick, waterproof manila envelope, extending it toward Julian. You're being formally served, Harrison said, his voice entirely devoid of emotion. These are emergency eviction documents authorized by a federal judge at 1:15 a.m. this morning. You are trespassing on property owned by Kensington Global Trust. Furthermore, enclosed is a civil suit from Apex Capital regarding the embezzlement of $250,000 and a restraining order filed on behalf of your wife, Charlotte Kensington. Julian didn't reach for the envelope. He stared at Harrison, his lips trembling. Charlotte Kensington, Julian whispered. Her name is Charlotte Evans. Harrison let the envelope drop to the floor. It landed with a heavy, wet slap against the slate tiles. You have 5 minutes to gather one bag of personal clothing and exit the premises, Harrison stated coldly. If you attempt to take any items purchased with funds from the joint accounts, you will be detained for theft. Your time starts now. Where am I supposed to go? Julian stammered, the reality of his total annihilation finally crushing the last remnants of his ego. I have no money. My accounts are frozen. My car. Your Porsche is currently being loaded onto a flatbed tow truck in the driveway. Harrison interrupted smoothly. It was leased under a subsidiary of Apex Capital, which has now revoked your corporate perks due to termination for cause. As for where you go, Mr. Mercer, that is entirely your problem. For minutes, Sienna crawled out from behind the sofa, shivering violently in my silk robe. She looked at Harrison, her mascara running down her face in thick, black rivers. I don't have anything to do with this, she cried, pointing a shaking finger at Julian. He lied to me. He told me it was his house. He told me the money was his. Let me get my things. I'll leave. Harrison turned his flashlight slightly to illuminate Sienna. Ms. Thorne, Harrison said, his tone devoid of pity. You are listed as a co-conspirator in a federal wire fraud investigation. You have also been terminated from Apex Capital. You are illegally trespassing on this property. You will leave with exactly what you brought into this house. Nothing more. Sienna looked at Julian, her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. You ruined my life, she screamed, lunging at him and slapping him hard across the face. The sharp smack echoed in the foyer. You pathetic, broke fraud. Julian, humiliated and broken, shoved her away. Get off me. Enough, Harrison barked. Escort them out. 2 tactical operators stepped forward. They didn't even give Julian the 5 minutes. They grabbed him by the arms, dragging him toward the splintered front door. Another operator grabbed Sienna, marching her out behind him. They were dragged out onto the porch, the freezing rain immediately soaking through Julian's pajamas and pasting my silk robe to Sienna's skin. They stood shivering on the slate tiles, watching as a massive industrial tow truck hauled Julian's beloved slate gray Porsche away into the stormy night. Keep moving, Harrison ordered, gesturing toward the street. Julian and Sienna trudged down the driveway, the freezing mud splashing against their bare ankles. The tactical team stood motionless on the lawn, watching them walk away into the dark. As they reached the end of the driveway, Julian saw my beige station wagon. It was still parked at the curb, the engine purring softly. As Julian approached, the passenger side window rolled down with a smooth electric hum. Warm air, smelling faintly of vanilla and leather, spilled out into the freezing rain. Julian stopped, turning his head to look inside. I was sitting in the driver's seat. I looked entirely dry, perfectly composed, and terrifyingly calm. The soft, gentle woman who had cooked his dinners and endured his insults was gone. In her place sat a woman who looked exactly like the billionaire titan who had raised her. Charlotte. Julian choked out, stepping toward the car. His pride was completely shattered. He was ready to beg. Charlotte, please. I don't understand. What'd you do? Just let me in the car. We could talk about this. Sienna rushed up beside him, shivering uncontrollably, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. She leaned toward the window. Charlotte, please. Sienna begged, her teeth chattering. I didn't know. He lied to me. He told me you were getting a divorce anyway. Please, my accounts are frozen. I don't have anywhere to go. I didn't look at them with hatred. I didn't look at them with anger. I looked at them with the absolute, chilling indifference one might reserve for insects on a windshield. You locked me out. Julian, I said, my voice perfectly level, easily carrying over the sound of the rain. You told me to go outside and cool off. I was drunk. I was angry. You were snooping. Julian pleaded, gripping the edge of the open window until his knuckles turned white. You took my job. You took my money. You took my house. I didn't take anything. I corrected him smoothly. I simply stopped protecting you from your own mediocrity. The house was mine. The job at Apex was granted because of my father's influence. The money you stole was mine. I gave you the illusion of power because I wanted a peaceful life. And you used that illusion to try and break me. Julian stared at me, the rain running down his face mixing with tears of absolute humiliation. He had spent 5 years believing he was the master of a universe that I had quietly purchased for him. I have nothing, Charlotte, Julian whispered, his voice cracking. I have absolutely nothing. You have each other, I said, shifting my gaze to Sienna. I looked at the young woman, shivering in my ruined silk robe. You said the cold rain helps people remember who the master of the house is. I said to Sienna, I think you were right. You should both stay out here a little longer. Let it really sink in. Charlotte, please. Julian begged. I pressed a button on the console. The tinted glass of the passenger window smoothly rolled up, cutting off his pleas, trapping him once again in the freezing, deafening roar of the storm. Julian and Sienna stood paralyzed in the street, watching as the station wagon's transmission engaged. I pulled smoothly away from the curb, my red tail lights glowing brightly as I disappeared down the affluent, tree-lined street, leaving them entirely alone in the dark. Julian looked back at the house. The massive, shattered front door stood open to the elements. Harrison and his men were already inside, securing the property that belonged to Kensington Global. He looked at Sienna. She was glaring at him with pure venom, her arms wrapped tightly around herself in the freezing rain. Don't talk to me, she spat, turning and walking away down the dark, muddy street. Julian stood alone in the rain. He had built his entire identity on the illusion of absolute control, using financial abuse and psychological manipulation to dominate a woman he believed to be entirely defenseless. His fatal flaw was the assumption that his cruelty was matched by his intelligence. In the end, the very lock he turned to punish his wife became the catalyst for his own profound unmaking. My retaliation was not merely a display of immense generational wealth. It was a masterclass in surgical precision. I didn't raise my voice, and I didn't resort to violence. Instead, I dismantled the architecture of his life brick by brick, exposing the devastating reality that he was only ever a temporary guest in my world. Ultimately, the man who thought he held all the keys was left standing in the freezing rain with absolutely nothing, realizing too late that true power rarely needs to announce itself. It simply waits for the perfect moment to strike. If this story lit a fire in you, if you understand the quiet, immovable power of a woman who turns her silence into a weapon, hit the subscribe button. Turn on notifications. Because the stories worth hearing are about the invisible women who refuse to stay down when the world pushes them to the floor. See you in the next one.